In this lab, we're going to study the various aspects of human muscle system, and reading the introduction falls upon you. I'm going to just briefly offer you some functions of the muscles. They move your bones, they generate heat, smooth muscles can help to move the food through your alimentary canal. Cardiac muscle pushes the blood through your veins and arteries, and muscles are necessary for respiration, and so on. So skeletal muscles are organs that consist of individual muscle cells. Here you can see an individual muscle cell, a muscle fiber. Each muscle fiber is surrounded by a thin connective tissue layer called endomysium. A bunch of muscle fibers shown here. That's a bunch of muscle fibers. They form a fascicle. Each fascicle is surrounded by a connective tissue called perimysium. And fascicles together form a muscle, which is surrounded by epimysium, the tough connective tissue that may continue itself as a tendon, which attaches the muscle to the periosteum of a bone. Now, when muscles contract, skeletal muscles contract, they are stimulated by the nerve impulses. And the neuron, shown here, for instance, as a green one, with all muscle fibers that are under that neuron's control, that whole assembly, a neuron and few muscle fibers, is called a motor unit. Okay, motor units may contain few muscle fibers or very many muscle fibers. That will be sort of a size of a motor unit. Now, this is the longitudinal section, a micrograph of a muscle cell. You can see that these cells are long and non-branched. They are striated. You see the stripes on the cell. So the stripes reflect the arrangement of the filaments responsible for contraction in so-called sarcomeres. Now, skeletal muscle is indeed striated, unlike smooth muscle, for example. And you can see that nuclei of skeletal muscles are pushed to the side of the cell. Each muscle cell contains multiple nuclei. Now here you can see some muscle fibers that are dying, necrotic muscle fibers. Okay, can be infection, various muscle disorders, or trauma. So healthy, you can see that healthier skeletal muscles are brighter. They have more mitochondria. These are more pale. They are also straight. The necrotic ones are swollen. Okay. Necrotic cells probably cannot contract, because there's a huge difference if you would look at necrotic cells here and normal cells here. Necrotic cells do not appear to have any striations. Now, what you see here is an entire fascicle in the muscle and perimysium surrounding it. The perimysium surrounds the entire fascicle, not individual muscle fiber. And here you can see a cross-section of a muscle from a patient with a chronic muscle tiredness, chronic muscle fatigue. You can see that there are very few fibers, and many of the fibers have been replaced by the adipose connective tissue, by fat. So no wonder that this patient suffers from muscle fatigue, because those muscles, little left of his muscles or her muscles, but these muscle structures have to work kind of, extra shift to enable this patient to move around. Now, the contractile unit of the muscle is the sarcomere. It consists of two halves of an I-band. This is an I-band and this is the I-band. And in the center, it's an A-band. So when sarcomere contracts, the ends of the sarcomere come closer. I-band basically disappears. A-band does not change. Now, here's the representation of the sliding filament model. You can see that each sarcomere, that's the Z-discs that bound the sarcomere in the center. These ones, you see thick filaments that consist of protein myosin, and thin filaments, the orange ones, consist of a protein actin. And you can see that actin filaments slide relatively to myosin. This is how it works. So you see that myosin heads right here, they break down ATP into ADP and phosphate right over here. And let me enlarge it. Hold on a second. Okay. So you can see that they break down ATP and phosphate, and then they release both of them. They bind to actin and propel actin forward. Okay, this is called a power stroke. And then they bind ATP, break it down, and coke back again, and then it all starts over right here. They cocked back, they bind actin, and they propel it forward. So for obvious reasons, we cannot observe a muscle contraction in this lab, but we're going to formulate a hypothesis. So we're going to take, otherwise we would take a muscle, a fragment of a muscle, and we would add ATP only, salts only, and ATP with salts, and see if any of this will stimulate the contraction of glycerinated muscle. And we will propose the hypothesis that we need both ATP and salts to stimulate the contraction of a glycerinated muscle. So this is how it looks. We would tease a fascicle right here, and we would add salts. We would measure before adding reagents. We would have 4 experimental samples: the control sample, which would receive only water, the sample with ATP, sample with salts, and sample with ATP and salts. So in the end, we would have, let's say you have 12 millimeters and 12 millimeters here. So no change. ATP, we would say, have 12 and 11. With salts, we would have 13 and 13. And with ATP plus salts, 13 and 10. So you see that you need, so first of all, muscle fibers can contract when they're not the part of living tissue, and chemicals that are required for muscle contraction turn out to be ATP and salts. Our initial hypothesis was supported, of course, and yes, that would be the general result. Potential sources of error and imprecision of contraction may be different amount of chemicals that are added in different by different students. Improvement standardized the amount of chemicals, standardized the size of the muscle fiber, improve measuring sort of capacity. Now these are muscles of the head and neck, muscles of the body, rear aspect of the body. So a few things here. So each muscle has an origin. Origin is the place where the muscle attaches to not immovable bone, and insertion is the place of attachment where muscle is attached to the bone that it moves. So for instance, triceps originates from scapula and humerus here, and it moves an elbow, so it has an insertion on ulna. And for biceps, the origin will be from the scapula and insertion into the radius. So, for instance, for flexion of an elbow, for flexing elbow, the muscle, the biceps, will be the primary mover, while for extension of an elbow, triceps will be a primary mover. And for flexion, biceps is primary mover, while triceps is antagonist muscle. There are also synergist muscles that help other muscles to produce a movement. For instance, for flexion of an elbow, biceps will be a primary mover and brachioradialis will be a synergist. It's kind of, a lot of different terms, which we're not going to review here. And we're going to try to do some general anatomy. So occipita frontalis will be this muscle right here, frontal belly of occipita frontalis. It raises your eyebrows here. Temporalis is shown here on the side, and temporalis helps you to chew, along with a muscle called masseter, which you can see on the image right here. Not that pink one, but that is a masseter. Orbicularis oculi is a circular muscle around your eye, which is responsible for blinking, and orbicularis oris is a circular muscle around your mouth that's responsible for whistling. Zygomaticus is shown here. Okay, so this is the muscle that's responsible for smiling. Now in this image we can find sternocleidomastoid muscle, pectoralis major, rectus abdominis, the straight muscle, the infamous six-pack, external and internal obliques. So this will be right here in the corner, will be external obliques, and these will be internal obliques. Transverse abdominis, you can't see on that image. This muscle is deep under this layer of connective tissue and rectus abdominis. Trapezius and latissimus dorsi would be, this will be a trapezius muscle, and that will be latissimus dorsi. So muscles that flex the arms, that will be pectoralis major. Extending the arms, that would be latissimus dorsi. Sit-ups, curls, obliques, internal and external, and rectus abdominis. Rotating the trunk, external and internal obliques, and extending the head will be trapezius. Yeah, that will be trapezius, yes. Now shoulder, arm, and forearm. So deltoid, quite obvious muscle of a shoulder. Biceps brachii is right here or right here. Triceps brachii is this muscle. Now palmaris longus will be this muscle right here in the center. And we have left extensor digitorum. That's this muscle. Extends your digit. So extending the forearm, it's a triceps flexing, it's a forearm, biceps flexing the wrist, palmaris longus, and extending the fingers, extensor digitorum. So let's continue talking about the muscles. Muscles of the buttocks, thighs, and legs. So sartorius muscle, the longest muscle in a human body, is here. Now quadriceps femoris. So we've got rectus femoris here. We've got vastus intermedius, which is deep to rectus femoris. You can see it on the picture. Vastus lateralis and vastus medialis. Adductors. So you have adductor longus right here. gracilis muscle, tibialis anterior, right over here. Gastrocnemius is this. Extensor digitorum is this muscle right over here. Gluteus maximus is the muscle of the buttock right here. And hamstring group biceps femoris will be this lateral muscle, and semimembranosus and semitendinosus, semimembranosus, semitendinosus. They overlay each other. So flexing the thigh will be all your quadriceps group, while extending the thigh, that to a large extent will be gluteus maximus. Adducting the thigh, bringing it closer to the center line, would be gracilis, adductor longus out of that group. Abducting the thigh, again, gluteus maximus to some extent. What else do we have? Extending the toes, extensor digitorum. Now, review questions here. Orbicularis, oculi muscles are here. When these muscles contract, you blink. Muscle that is labeled A is the masseter. It's chewing muscle. And frontal belly of occipiter frontalis. It is responsible for elevating the eyebrows. Now, rectus abdominis is here. Transversus abdominis is really deep, so this is the transversus abdominis. You can see third layer of abdominal muscle. Rectus abdominis, as you can see, obviously is superficial to transversus abdominis. And internal and external obliques, A and B. So A, you see internal obliques, and external obliques are B right here and right here. One of the movements that these muscles produce is rotation of a trunk and lateral flexion of a trunk. The name rectus abdominis tells you it's a straight muscle. It's rectus. Abdominis is its location. Trapezius and pectoralis major and latissimus dorsi. So that's going to be a trapezius muscle, latissimus dorsi, pectoralis major. Muscle that is labeled A obviously is a biceps. This muscle really flexes your forearm. Sternocleidomastoid is labeled B. Sternocleidomastoid tells you that it connects sternum and mastoid process. Muscle that is labeled C on the image is a deltoid muscle. And extensor digitorum is labeled D. It extends your fingers. That's what the name says, extensor digitorum. Tendons that are attached to extensor digitorum, they project to middle three fingers. Okay? So insertions are in the fingers. Sartorius will be right here. Biceps femoris is the muscle on the posterior aspect. It's going to be lateral muscle. And tibialis anterior will be right here. That's a fragment of tibialis anterior muscle. Biceps femoris belongs to the hamstrings. Biceps femoris tells you this bi-headed muscle that is located in the femoral region of the body. Muscle that is labeled A, connected to the Achilles tendon, is gastrocnemius. And vastus intermedius is labeled B. You see this muscle is deep to It shouldn't be biceps femoris, it should be rectus femoris. It's the typo. This muscle is in between the vastus medialis and vastus lateralis. Some disorders of the muscle system. So Paul has, you see this damage, this muscle replaced by connective tissue. The disorder is muscle dystrophy. Treatment options are very poor. Treatment options are mostly steroids. So muscle here, it's a torn muscle, basically overexertion. Muscle that is appeared to be torn. If it's a posterior view, it's probably biceps femoris. To prevent this type of injury, you have to warm up well, stretch, don't overwork. Difference between the strain and the sprain. So sprained muscles is basically it's broken. Strained, it's just a bit overexerted. It's not completely torn. Autoimmune disease that Mary Jane has, it's called drooping eyelid, called ptosis. Drooping eyelids are common in a condition called myasthenia gravis. Disorders anti-inflammatory specific, and there are some receptor agonists that can improve the performance of muscles, but it's a chronic autoimmune condition. Okay, so let's talk about this, some review questions. Sarcomeres. Sarcomere A is obviously relaxed, sarcomere B is contracted, sarcomere B is shorter. This is how we can tell. Glycerinated muscle fibers require both ATP and salts for contraction. The difference between prime mover, antagonist, and synergist: prime mover performs the movement, antagonist performs the opposite movement, antagonizes the movement, and a synergist helps the prime mover. Orbicularis oculus here, orbicularis oris here. Blinking, orbicularis oculi. Puckering the mouth, orbicularis oris, and raising eyebrows, frontal belly of the occipital frontalis. Skeletal muscle fiber and a fascicle. So this is the skeletal muscle fiber. This is a skeletal muscle fiber, and this is the fiber. This whole thing is the fascicle. Difference: muscle fiber is the cell, and the fascicle is the bunch of muscle cells. And muscle fiber, when it contracts, it shortens. Biceps brachii is located in the upper part of your arm. Biceps femoris is located in the posterior aspect of the femoral region. These muscles both are flexors, and they both have two heads, biheaded origins. So the origin of the muscle remains stationary while the insertion is attached to the movable structure. So sartorius right here, rectus femoris and tibialis anterior on the diagram. Rectus abdominis is here. Transversus abdominis is a muscle in that tiny little window. Rectus abdominis is superficial. It lies on the surface, closer to the surface of the body compared to transversus abdominis. Rectus abdominis says that it's a straight muscle. It goes from top to bottom in the abdomen, while transversus abdominis tells you that the muscle fibers are in the horizontal plane. These abdominal muscles rotating the trunk and doing sit-ups. Trapezius, deltoid, rectus femoris, and the gastrocnemius are right here. And that will conclude our conversation about the muscle system.